All right, so we have a question from a viewer in Benson who wants to know, how does the panel feel about the proposed Appleton prison reopening? This viewer's concerned about the possibility of additional jobs in that area. As I was telling the panel before we went on the air, when I started doing this program a quarter century ago, the Appleton prison was a topic of conversation, and here we are again. So clearly an important issue. Let's start with you, Representative Vogel. Any thoughts on that?
Well, again, it's an issue that has been quickly introduced to me. I did go on all the bonding tours, and we visited the penal institution in Rush City and looked at the crowding problem that they're having and the money it's going to take to remodel that so that they're going to have adequate space to deal with the people that they have. So the decision partly becomes based on, do you add space there, or do you kind of recreate the space that's already existing? I am not on the committee that really deals with that directly, although I'm on the bonding committee, so most likely it'll come to us as far as the funding. As far as the facility itself, I have to admit I've never been there, again, having just entered the legislature. I do think that we have to be as prudent with the taxpayer money as possible, so therefore looking probably at both our alternatives and seeing what is the best thing that works out relative to the inmates that have to be housed and hopefully rehabilitated.
Representative Hansen, your thoughts?
I think we have to have a conversation about who's in prison and why they're in prison. And I think we have to have a real discussion about recovery and addiction. And I get concerned when we talk about prisons for economic development. And I understand the job losses, and I understand, but I also am concerned when we talk about prisons and expanding prisons, and we tend to lose the idea of, I think, of folks who may be in for lesser offenses, that we should be trying to find a way to get them into recovery, get them out of the cycle of addiction, get them out of the criminal lifestyle, if possible, and to try to get them a job. And so the job discussion, the change that I've seen in the years I've been in the legislature when I door knock is now as I door knock more, I find people who are dealing with recovery issues, dealing with mental illness issues, dealing with experiences in the criminal justice system where they can't get a job after they got out. And so when we talk about more beds, we talk about more prisons, we're talking about the end result of this. And I understand when you have a facility there, the desire to try to make sure that that you would have employment. But we have to have some type of discussion about how we're going to deal with this, and also the aging population in our prisons. How do we move folks through and try to not only deal with rehabilitation out of a criminal system or a criminal experience, but also dealing with the issues that may have sent them in there. So that's kind of a long answer, but I think when we talk about just more beds, we're dealing with an old way of looking at things, and we've got to deal with reality the way it is right now.
Yeah, well, he is correct that we do have to look at our incarceration and who really belongs in prison. I don't know the current numbers, but I believe it's upward of $60,000 a year to keep a person in prison. That's a lot of money. That adds up really quick. That said, Minnesota also has one of the lowest, if not the lowest, incarceration rate in the country. So there's a lot of people that are not in prison for lesser crimes in Minnesota as well. Even with criminal justice reform, this issue isn't going to go away. So we're going to have to do something. And I do represent Rush City, and I was there with a Senate bonding tour. So the idea of a couple $100 million construction project on top of renovations, is enticing for the district. But I think if you run the numbers, probably Appleton makes more sense strictly on paper. Somebody told me, and this may not be fully accurate, this is not my area of expertise, I don't serve on these committees, but someone told me that to rent that space would be cheaper than just the debt service on building a new prison or doing the expansion, and we don't have any of the risk associated with it. We wouldn't have all of the other costs, et cetera, et cetera. So I think on paper that one probably is going to make the most sense, but then it gets more complicated after that because we do have some of these issues, and then you've got the question of, what about private prisons and the unions and all of these things that get thrown into the mix as well.
And plus, one of the issues, just in fairness to those who are not as enthusiastic about this, you've also got the fact that Appleton is a long ways away from a lot of where the families of many of these prisoners are incarcerated. And so, there are obviously strong policy arguments that run both ways. How does this issue unfold? What happens to it? What committees does it go to? Can you give our viewers some indication of how this is going to work?
If they were to expand our city, for example, that would be a bonding project. That would go through the capital investment committees. It also would have to go through, I suppose, Judiciary and Public Safety or whatever the House version of that is, because it involves Department of Corrections, and that would be the case for Appleton as well. I'm not sure if it would need to go through any other policy committees other than that with oversight on Department of Corrections. Obviously, budget would have to go through the full finance committees or whatever your finance committee is called.
And we should say that there have been a task force. I'm not on those committee areas, but I know that there have been groups trying to meet with a variety of these issues. I think it gets into the overall discussion of the budget as the forecast number comes down. There's less cash available, and so then we, if we do Retch City, we've got bonding. You've got a long list of bonding projects that were heard today in the House. So it goes into the competition with everything else in the mix for us to consider this session.